All right, everybody, welcome to the inaugural edition of Fitz Politic, our live political talk show. And they always say, go big or go home. We went big with our first guest, the sitting four-term Attorney General of South Carolina, the front runner in the race for governor of South Carolina in 2026, Alan Wilson. Thank you for coming in, Al.
Hey, thanks for letting me be your inaugural guest. Hopefully this won't be the last time.
Well, you've been in here before. You've done our in-studio segment. This is obviously a little more laid back and obviously live, so, anything can happen. But, I called you the front runner a moment ago, but there was a poll that was released by one of your opponents just this week where suddenly you have gone from, I think, 23% to 19%, but she has jumped 12% in the span of just a couple weeks. Nancy Mace releasing this poll. I want to ask you about this survey that Mace released that shows her arguably and ostensibly as the front runner. Do you buy those numbers, and where do you think the race's real numbers are right now?
Well, first off, no, I don't buy the numbers. What I will say about the poll is everything about that poll tracks with all the other polls that I've seen. Everyone else is probably in the low teens, high single to low teens. I'm always in the low to mid 20s, but this has me at 19, so maybe within the margins. The only thing different is Nancy. But what is consistent with this poll and every other poll I've seen over the last month or two is her unfavorability at nearly 50%. Her name ID is like 90%, which means she has very little runway to go. That's what we've seen in other polls. Her unfavorability, she's upside down by 20, 30 points. My favorability ratios, my fave-unfave ratio was, I think, one of the best, if not the best in this poll. And so when people ask me what I think about it, I say, don't ask me what I think. Ask what her former campaign manager thinks about it.
Yeah, he kind of took to her on social media.
Yeah, just pulled it apart. This is and what's interesting about this poll, I don't think does her any favors. This is a push poll, paid for, an internal poll done by a campaign that pretty much ratifies every other poll that we have seen, with the exception that she has now leapfrogged everyone into first place again. But frankly, I think it kind of affirms and reaffirms what I've already known about the state of the race. Look, this race is still far from over. There's a high degree or high percentage of people who are undecided. I think people have put the holidays behind them. They're starting to open their eyes. We're going to get into the new year. There's going to be a lot of campaigning going over the next 5 months.
A lot of money spent.
A lot of money is going to be spent. We're going to be going from one corner of the state to the other. But again, the only poll that I really care about is the one that we take on June 9th and maybe again on June 23rd. But I will tell you this, I would rather be me in this race than any other candidate. I like our position. I like where we are, and I'm very optimistic about the future of our campaign.
Now, the big question, though, is did the president see Mace's poll? Because, he's following this race very closely. And in fact, he's getting pushed by different people in his orbit to support different candidates in the race. I know there's some folks in D.C. who really like you, wanted to endorse you. There's also some folks, I think his chief of staff is a fan of Pamela Vett, but apparently down at Mar-a-Lago over the holidays, he was actually reading FITSNEWS coverage of a poll that had you in the lead. So it could bode well for you.
Oh, well, look, who wouldn't want President Donald Trump's, endorsement? Everybody wants his endorsement, but at the end of the day, I think the president's going to look at a number of things. Will, you've written about this. We've talked about this. People talk about being for the president. They're talking about standing up there like back in, was it January of 2023? It was when I was going down to the Murdaugh trial, but the president came to South Carolina. People talk about I was with the president first. Well, I defended the president in court back in December of 2020. I had 30 plus complaints filed against me in January of 2021 by Democratic operatives who were trying to take my law license. It took 4 years and $100,000 to defend myself. They were all dismissed this past summer back in June. But it's one thing to say you're for the president. It's another thing to lay your livelihood on the president. I've done that. I was there for the president in his criminal trial. I did legal briefs in favor of the president when went after that awful civil judgment against him. I've supported the president at every turn, both in his first administration. I'm supporting him in this administration. And again, I've literally laid my bar license on the line for him, where others can't say that.
So does it surprise you, though? And it surprised me because the people that were sharing this story with us were like, yeah, he read the entire article about this race. He's very plugged into what's happening. Does it surprise you that he's that focused on this election?
Look, I've talked to people who are very close to the president, and they say they have actually watched him in a meeting. His phone will ring, and it'll be an unknown number. It'll be a number that's not registered in his phone. He'll just swipe and go, hello. and they're like, this is the president of the United States answering the phone. I kind of got a chuckle out of that. But this is a president who I think really is as hands-on with the news and hands-on on polling and hands-on on the elections as any president. I don't think he has handlers telling him what to think. I think he really is engaged. How engaged he is on this race, we've heard anecdotal stories. You've heard some, but I do think he cares about this race. But also, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now. So, will he get involved, or will he wait until later on? I don't know. But I'll tell you right now, I've been there for the president. He knows I've been there for him. I've had conversations with the president. I've been to the White House a number of times. So I think our relationship with the president is very sound.
Let's talk a little bit about Mace, because obviously she's courting his endorsement. That's run into some headwinds recently with Rand Paul and his movement really coming on board in support of Nancy Mace. Obviously, that's not a faction of the Republican Party that's aligned with Trump. So there's been some discord there. But I got to ask you, she was the front runner in this race when she first announced last August. I think most people would agree that she sort of entered the race in the pole position. But over the last few months, she really set herself on fire. And now that people are starting to pay attention to this race, I guess my question is, you've seen her on the stump. You've gone to some of the same events. You think there's something wrong with her? I mean,
Will, I honestly don't see her on the stump. I think the last time I physically saw her was at Congressman Russell Fry's Fish Fry, which was back in August. I don't think
Did you speak to her?
No, she didn't come into the event. She came in, spoke for 5 minutes, went outside. I had a media availability and left. That's the last time I recall seeing her. I honestly don't really think about her. I mean, I know everyone. I mean, I get attacked.
She thinks about you a lot.
She thinks about me a lot. But honestly, I'm going to let her be her. I'm going to be me. Again, I think she's really good at getting attention, and that's all fine and good. But when people are looking for a governor, they're looking for a governor that when there's a hurricane coming to the coast of South Carolina, they're looking for a governor when there's $1 billion deal or when there's a major investment in our state. Is this person giving them a sense of calm, a sense of peace, a sense of confidence? It's kind of like when you're going through bad turbulence on an airplane. I always like to look at the flight attendants. If the flight attendants are overreacting or freaking out, it makes me a little nervous because they live in the airplane. People are looking to the governor to find out if there's a turbulent time. Is the governor creating a sense of confidence and calm when there's a crisis or disaster going on, or a time that we need the governor to stand up and be statesmanlike? And what I can tell you is you can be an agent of change. You can be an agent of transformation without being an agent of chaos. You don't have to insult everybody. You don't have to set the world on fire. You don't have to use profanity every time you get in a fight with someone. You don't have to go online every day and post 150 times a day to get attention. I believe people want a governor, Will. I believe people want a governor who can be a leader, a person who can build consensus around issues, a governor that can bring unity. And I believe I'm that person.
Let's talk about another one of your rivals who has spent a great deal of money already in this race. It was really fascinating, by the way. I'm sure you guys were pleased with where you ended up this past week on the campaign finance front. 1.3 million is it?
Cash on hand.
That's pretty good heading into the new year.
In the campaign.
Trailing only Ralph Norman, the 5th District Congressman. But one of the other candidates in the race who has spent a lot of money is Lieutenant Governor Pamela Yvette. And we mentioned her earlier, really chasing that Trump endorsement hard. But she spent a ton of money, and it's boosted her a little bit. She was kind of in single digits for a long time. She spent all this money, $2 million, I believe, between her campaign and her political action committee. Kind of bumped up into the mid-teens, but really hasn't moved out of that second or third spot. As you look at her candidacy, obviously she's somebody who continues to pump her own resources into her candidacy. Is she more of a durable challenger than Nancy Mace? Is she somebody that you see perhaps having more staying power in this race, given those resources? And I guess the big question is, do you think she can successfully win that presidential endorsement?
Look, I don't know anything about the president, whether she'll get the presidential endorsement or not. What I do know is what people in South Carolina are looking for is they're looking at a candidate who has a proven track record of delivering results. I've been Attorney General now, Will, 15 years. Today is my 15th anniversary. And a year from the day is the inauguration. And for 15 years, I have I have been out there Even before President Trump became President Trump, I've been out there defending South Carolina, defending our rights against the Biden and Obama administrations. I have been out there growing our ICAC task force. I know we'll talk about that in a minute. I've been out there. Basically creating the human trafficking task force, going out there fighting human trafficking. I've been out there defending the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, defending the unborn. I've been out there taking very high profile positions, and I have been attacked for 15 years, constantly attacked.
Do you think Pam Yvette hasn't done these things? Do you think?
Well,
I feel like you're setting up a contrast here.
Well, I am setting up a contrast. I tell people all the time, not only have I have a robust record as Attorney General, working with the legislature to reform our CDV laws, our DUI laws, taking the first stab at judicial selection reform, which hadn't happened in 30 years until I started barnstorming the state. The attorney is a very, very big office. The office of the I tell people, if you go back to 1865 all the way up to 2018, 2018 was the first year that the lieutenant governor was appointed. Up until that point, lieutenant governor ran independently. There have been 3 lieutenant governors elected governor in 160 plus years. That was in 1954 with George Bell Timmerman, 1958 with Fritz Hollings, and 56 years ago when John West won in 1970. And the reason I say that is because that office is a part-time ceremonial office. And I'm not knocking the current occupant. She inherited the office the way it was. The office can be so much more. The office, it needs to be given teeth. But basically, when it became a running mate, they took away the Office on Aging. They took away presiding over the Senate. I think I have a record that is worthy of running on. Also, I'm a 30-year combat veteran. I've served in the National Guard for 30 years. I've got a combat tour in Iraq. I've led soldiers under enemy fire. I've had to make life and death decisions. I've been an executive as an officer. I'm a colonel in the National Guard. I've served at National Guard Bureau in Washington, D.C. I've had to lead in an executive capacity, both a complex agency like the Attorney General's office as well as in the military. So I think people are going to be looking at the candidates. There are people out there that will say, hey, this endorsement means something to me because I trust this person's opinion. But at the end of the day, I think the vast majority of South Carolinians are going to look at the candidates and are going to measure us on our records. They're going to measure us on what they believe our capabilities are. Do I want the president's record? Absolutely. He's the most popular president in our party in my lifetime, in this last century. Of course, I'd want his endorsement. And I think his endorsement would be helpful to anyone who got it. But I truly believe that our campaign is about what we want to do for South Carolina. Right now, there are families having to choose between paying medical bills or buying food. And to me, what I want this campaign to be about is us focusing like a laser on affordability for families and profitability for businesses. I want businesses to have as much profits as possible. I don't care if you're a Fortune 100 company or you're starting out in a garage. If you're a family out there, I want you to have opportunity. I want you to be able to pay your medical bills and buy food. I don't want your children to have to worry about whether they're going to eat or not. And so that's what we're going to focus on in the Wilson-Rickenbaugh administration next year when we take office.
We just mentioned Rickenbaugh. Obviously, you rolled out your lieutenant governor nominee this past week, the senator from Florence. He published an op-ed on FITSNEWS.com just today, articulating kind of his vision for campaigning with you. Tell us about this choice. What put him at the top of your board?
Mike is someone I've only known Mike for 4 years, and over the last couple of years has been more of a professional relationship. But over the last year, we've started to develop a very personal relationship. He has an incredible adoption story. Obviously, his biological mother got pregnant with him when she was 14 years old, and she made the decision to put him up into a foster system, which gave him a shot at life. And then, of course, from that foster system, he got adopted by loving parents who taught them the values he has today. I love that part of his story. As you know, Will, my biological father was killed in a helicopter crash in the Army in 1975. My mother came back to South Carolina and a few years later reconnected with my dad, Joe Wilson, who adopted me. It's a different kind of adoption story, but we really kind of bonded on that. The other thing we bonded on, Mike's a 20-year credentialed law enforcement officer. He, class 3 law enforcement officer. He's a state constable, was a DNR game warden. Someone like me who's been a career prosecutor who loves law enforcement is such a big part of my life. That really attracted me. I wanted a lieutenant governor that could relate to law enforcement. This is a guy who 20 years ago made the decision to stand on that blue line. It wasn't for political gain. He didn't do it right before he ran for office. He did it 20 years ago. And I love that. And there's a reason roughly 75% of all the Republican elected sheriffs in the state of South Carolina have endorsed me in the race for governor, including every single sheriff in the 1st Congressional District.
But be careful with sheriffs. We got Andy Fancher in the building. He takes down one of those a week,
Well, look.
Including a few who backed you in the past.
Well, look, I mean, if you recall, I actually was involved in the prosecutions of sheriffs from 15 years ago that had endorsed me and supported me. But sadly, you have a job to do. You have to follow the law. You have to do what's right. And if there's a conflict, I give the case to someone to go. But if there's not, we pursue the case. And
I do want to ask you about it. And we got a ton to cover, but I do want to ask you about that. The case against Sheriff Chuck Wright.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he was charged federally.
Mm-hmm.
But as you know, he's got Trey Gowdy as his lawyer. Trey Gowdy, very close to Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Trey Gowdy, who has secured and helped secure pardons for other misbehaving Republican elected officials. So there is a good shot Chuck Wright could get a presidential pardon.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that the state did not pursue charges, and I know you delegated this, it was not your prosecutorial decision, but is it not concerning to you that the state did not pursue criminal charges against this sheriff that was flagrantly violating multiple laws up there in Spartanburg County, all under the, cloak of the Bible? And
well, first off, I haven't had an opportunity to have a conversation with the solicitor that made the charging decision. And it's easy for me to take pot shots at someone when I haven't heard their point of view. There's always layers of a story when you're making a prosecutive decision. So it's easy to cast it the way you did, to phrase it the way you did. I'm not sure what federal charges are out there or what went into the charging decision by that solicitor. The last thing I'm going to do is criticize the solicitor. I asked the solicitor to take on a very awesome task. I was too close to Sheriff Wright. I did not want to make that decision. I thought it would look inappropriate. I gave that case to another solicitor in the upstate who did not have a relationship with the sheriff. That solicitor made a decision, but I'm not going to go back and second guess them, especially when I haven't had an opportunity to talk to them about it.
Okay. Well, let's dive into some tough stuff. We've got a lot to cover. Really appreciate your generosity with your time. I wanted to ask you about the case. This is a case down in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. A defendant prosecuted by your office on child sex abuse material charges. Travis Reed Gay.
Mm-hmm.
This guy reached a plea agreement with your office back in November of last year. 7 felonies were pled down to 1.
Mm-hmm.
He was given a 10-year suspended sentence. Has already reoffended. And this is not an isolated incident, General. And I gotta ask you this question because we spoke with a judge down in the Low Country who sees a lot of these cases. And they made a comment to me that I think really is concerning. The judge said, quote, "It's always like this. All their cases get pled down to nothing." These are some heinous crimes. This is the worst. The R.J. May story. In fact, R.J. May was sentenced today to 17 and a half years in the federal system, but he's going to serve that time. Mm-hmm. These state offenders that are, again, your office's responsibility to prosecute, they're walking. I mean, how do you?
Well, it's funny that the judge that said that the judges are the one that make the sentencing decisions. When we don't, first off, people say plead down to nothing. That's not what a guilty plea is. People say when someone, you can go to trial or you can plea. And they feel like if you go to plea, somehow they got some sweetheart deal where they're getting less time or probation. That's not what a plea is. The way I've observed it and the way it's been explained to me is that internet crimes against children cases are very complex. There's a lot of forensic evidence in there. It's not just enough to get someone's IP address or screen name, but you've got to actually attach them to the act of doing the thing of exploiting a child. So it's very difficult. The trials are won during the investigation. Okay, so basically you lock down the facts, and then these people get charged by a local law enforcement agency. Sometimes the charges have to be downgraded because when you start doing the forensic investigation, there's insufficient evidence or there's a problem with the case that local law enforcement didn't identify because they're not equipped to identify it. We identify it. Well, our job is to get it in front of a judge. Now, when you say you're taking 7 charges down to 1, the conduct is still pleading to the conduct. Now I went back and asked questions about this case because let me tell you something, Will. I'm so proud of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force team that we have in the Attorney General's office. It is a very difficult job to do. This is an office task force that has been responsible for 2,600 convictions since 2011, 15 years ago today, since I took office. We have grown the funding and the capacity by 400%. We have quadrupled the number of agencies that are involved in our ICAC task force over the last 15 years. It is difficult to fill the role because there are articles written in the public. There are people out there that attack. Sometimes they're attacking me, but they're attacking the AG's office because the general public doesn't understand how the criminal justice system works. So someone gets charged 6 or 7 times, and those charges get rolled up into one global charge. That person is not getting less time. I mean, in fact, we talked to the judges. The judges are hearing about every single piece of evidence, every single video, every single picture. And they're doing it because, I mean, here's the thing. Every picture is an actual warrant. If you have 100 warrants, you're going to have to do 100 sentencing sheets. You're going to crush down court. I mean, court's going to grind to a halt. Our job is to get all of the conduct that the person was involved with, get it in front of a judge, give the judge all the information, and make sure that the judge has the information to make a decision. In this particular case, this person got put on the sex offender registry for 25 years. We actually have defendants that actually asked to go to prison for a couple of years so they don't get put on the sex offender registry. This person had 10 years hanging over them.
Why don't we do both?
What's that?
Why don't we lock them up and put them on the registry?
Well, again, our job is to put it in front of the judge, and the judge makes the charging decisions.
And again, due respect, I've got to ask you this. When you guys roll these things up and consolidate these charges, and in this case, this guy had a second degree, which was reduced to a single third degree.
The second degree was dismissed because there was insufficient evidence.
Okay, but does that not, when you roll these things down, does that not limit the ability of judges to impose tougher sentences?
Not at all. I mean, my chief deputy is a former judge. We've talked about this. When you're, if you get charged with 6 charges, when we indict you, we are encapsulating all 6 charges in one indictment, and we are giving the judge all of the information from all of those other 5 charges. The judge is not being withheld. That information is making it to a judge. And again, it's judicial economy. We're getting that information to a judge. The judge is getting all of the facts. The judge is making their sentencing decisions. And that is our job, is to get it to a judge. The judge makes the sentencing. So for a judge to anonymously say, we plead them down to nothing, the plea is they're pleading because going to trial, they're going to be found guilty, and they know it. Some people say they're going to go to trial up until the day of court, and then they end up pleading. Mm-hmm. I mean, we actually prep these things for trial, and then they plea at the last minute because they know it's hopeless. Mm-hmm. And so we're not pleading them down to nothing. If there's a nothing, it's because the judge gave them a nothing. But we're giving the judge all the facts. And so our office got this guy. He had 10 years hanging over him. He has 25 years on the sex offender registry. The judge in this case saw fit to hang that time over his head and put him on probation. He basically violated his probation. This is not being handled by us. This is the bond was handled by a magistrate. His probation revocation will be handled by Probation, Pardon, and Parole Services, which is a cabinet agency in the executive branch of government that does not fall under me. But again, Will, at the end of the day, our job is to go out there, find these people with local law enforcement, get them charged, get them in court, and get them convicted. And if we can get them in prison, great, but that's up to the court to make that determination. But we have taken away the discretion to put them on the sex offender registry with our laws, and that is something I've advocated for.
Well, I want to ask you this. Last fall, FITSNEWS published an exclusive report on staffing funding issues at ICAC in your office, which is the Internet Crimes Against Children Division, which pursues these charges. A lot of questions were raised about whether or not that office was a priority within your administration. Let me ask you this. Since that story came out, there have been some internal moves to boost the capabilities of that office. But let me ask you this. What is your response when people say, well, the problem is we don't have enough people in your office doing these jobs?
Well, you know how hard it is to keep people employed when their job is to look at child porn all day, and then they get castigated and run through the coals by political people who want to have an agenda. I mean, I'm not knocking Fitz for publishing the article, but those articles really have a psychological impact on our prosecutors and investigators. When you got people out there in Congress saying that for Alan Wilson, by the way, I have an average of 8,000 cases a day, so I'm not the one making every single charging decision because I can't. But when people are saying Alan Wilson is not doing enough on ICAC, you're saying all those prosecutors and those investigators are not doing enough.
But general due respect, these were people that wanted to stay in the office, but felt that your administration wasn't just meeting them a third of the way.
We didn't have the money. Well, we asked for funding last year by the General Assembly. We're one of the few agencies that didn't get any. I mean, and I'm asking for substantial funding this year, but we did not get the funding for sustainment and recruitment. I mean, we asked for a substantial amount of money so that we can keep these people. But here's the same people in the ICAC task force, I can cut money over here from our Solicitor General office, but then we can't defend cases of the Supreme Court. I can cut out money from the capital litigation or the appellate division, but then we can't defend the solicitors in our cases or the civil. I mean, there's a finite amount of money. We have grown this operation by 400%, but now we're trying to pay lawyers. Imagine this. You look at child porn all day and you make $70,000 a year. You can go up the street and you can prosecute drug and armed robbery cases and make $90,000 a year. You don't have to look at that stuff. And you don't get attacked every day by the media because, they don't like the outcome that a judge did, but you're getting blamed for it. Which job are you going to take? I'm so proud, Will. I mean, for people to say that we haven't prioritized internet crimes against children, why would I have quadrupled the amount of funding for it in the last 15 years? We have quadrupled the number of agencies that participate in this task force. I mean, almost every other year, I'm going back and asking for additional funding. Last year, we recognized that we were having trouble keeping people in. But a lot of people are leaving. It's not even the money. For some, it's the money. And by the way, I think you're quoting a couple of people who, in exit interviews, left the office and criticized the leadership in the ICAC section. But I would remind people that 90% of the exit interviews in the Attorney General's office are all positive. You're citing people in the 10% who had problems with the office. And I can't comment for personnel reasons, but some of the people that complained about not getting enough money were people who were probably needed to go look for other employment anyway. I'll leave it at that. But again, at the end of the day, Will, it has been a top priority for me. And the fact that I have quadrupled the size of this organization and highlighted it in everything that I do underscores that.
We got a few more tough questions here. By the way, I do appreciate you being willing to sit down and field these and respond.
These are fair questions.
I wanted to ask you, we're talking about funding in the office. There was a presentation just this week to the Greenville County Republican Party by a guy running for the office you currently hold, David Pasco, First Circuit Solicitor. He alleged a, quote, culture of corruption in your office, zeroing in on some political contracts. And I wanted to ask you about this because I was under the impression you and Solicitor Pasco had buried the hatchet. You guys were really at odds for years, but in recent years, you've been collaborating and cooperating on issues like judicial reform. Were you surprised to see Pasco coming at you again?
Not really. I mean, it's to be expected. It's interesting. He's never once called me to ask me any questions about this stuff. But what's interesting,
how do you respond to his allegation, though, the culture of corruption?
Oh, it's false. It's non-true. It's ridiculous. And honestly, what I read your article. That's where I didn't watch his presentation. I had people tell me about it. But all of the talking points that were used are the same talking points that Democratic activists were shilling last fall when we were going through our 7-year oversight process. It's the same talking points that have been investigated and debunked. And so, no, it's not true. And it's kind of laughable. But again, these are Democratic talking points that have, when they didn't get the outcome that they wanted, they wanted this to be a real thing in an investigation. But when it was investigated and found to be basically frivolous, these allegations were totally frivolous. They shopped them around to other people. And I guess he just took it.
But again, and I want to push back a little bit on you. The Oversight Committee did not explore these allegations.
Yes, they did.
Well,
Oh no, they did. You and I have had conversations, and
we disagree on this.
And you think I got off easy, or you think that I got asked softball questions. But here's the thing: they ask questions based on things. They do an investigation, and from that investigation, they find things of concern. They investigated this stuff. We had to answer questions with them. They investigated it. They applied the law. They looked at the facts, and they found that it was baseless. That is why they didn't need to ask me questions on the committee hearing.
I think the best thing that happened to you in that process was Nancy Mace coming in and sitting in the hall, because I think the chairman of that committee made a decision and a calculation that he didn't want it to get political.
Well,
that's what I think happens. And we've talked about it.
You and I, and we've had differences of opinion on that. I mean, look, Will, at the end of the day, if I'm investigating you for what will ultimately be a public hearing, and the allegations and the ridiculous things said about you, I find out are completely untrue, then why am I going to ask you about it in the hearing when I already know that it's not true? If there were issues, if there were questions that they couldn't get from their investigation, they would need to ask me. But again, anybody can make an allegation. This happens to me all the time. Somebody files a complaint, right? Mm-hmm. And then they say, Alan Wilson's under investigation. It doesn't matter if the complaint is complete crap.
But you're telling me that, to your view of things, you believe the Senate did explore these allegations,
absolutely,
things that Pasco raised during his speech.
Absolutely. We had to talk to him.
So you were interviewed by Senator
I wasn't, but the Attorney General staff was. Absolutely.
Okay, but why? And I guess my question then would be, shouldn't that have been done in public? I guess that was my whole point. And we never criticized your office during the oversight process. We criticized Senator Massey.
Right.
We called out the Senate Oversight Committee for, again, dropping the ball, I think was the term I used. Yeah. So you probably wouldn't agree with that. But you're telling me that they asked these questions privately?
Well, we'll
research this in private. I mean, the whole point of oversight is to have this done in public, is it not?
Well, it's like having an investigation and finding that there's no crime and then going to have a trial anyway. That's kind of what you're wanting. Well, you did an investigation, you found no wrongdoing, but let's go ahead and go to court anyway. Let's go ahead and have a public trial, even though there's no evidence, or the evidence is completely insufficient. I mean, look, the allegations were against members of our team in the Attorney General's office, and there was a lot of stuff said in those. I've heard the allegations that were made back in the fall, and the exact same allegations that were made the other night in Greenville. They're not true. They were passed around by their Democratic talking points. They're attacked.
We're talking about your opponent in the Murdoch trial. We're talking about Dick Harpootlian, and let's just
and there's a lot of people that know who's involved in this, and they know the relationships of people involved, and these things are being repackaged. Look, at the end of the day, Will, I'm a 30-year combat veteran. I'm an officer in the military with a secret security clearance. Okay. Why would I risk? I mean, my entire life has been built on integrity and upholding the values of the Army, upholding the values of my oath of office. And I am so proud of what the men and women in the Attorney General's office have done. Our staff have followed all the rules. Anybody can make an allegation, but when that allegation is baseless or meritless, or it's out of context, and people look into it and they find it's baseless or meritless or out of context, or the person making the allegations doesn't understand the law, or they omit facts. What you're saying is, and this is where you and I will disagree, you're saying it's determined by investigators and career attorneys working for the oversight, which I have no control over.
Right.
They still want to go ahead and talk about that. It's like if I investigate you for a crime and I find you to be innocent of it. And by the way, this wasn't even a crime. But if I'm investigating you for a wrongdoing and I find that you have done nothing wrong, why am I going to put out a press release or have a hearing talking about all the things that you were alleged to have done, just to embarrass you or just to run you through the mud? The whole purpose of the oversight process is to identify issues in the office. Every office does this every 7 years. They try to identify issues. When they identify an issue, if the issue actually exists, then they have the public hearing. There was no issue to have a hearing on.
Fair enough. We will obviously, Pasco's continuing to push this, and we'll see what sort of evidence he rolls out along with these.
If he wants to call me, I'm happy to talk to him about it. But
I really thought you guys had buried the hatchet.
I mean, look, we were getting along for a couple of years. I really have nothing to say about him. He has an agenda, and he has people in the Democratic Party that want him to push this narrative, and he's going to push it. But if he finds himself in the Attorney General's office, he's going to have to look a lot of people in the eye and explain to a lot of good people why he ran them through the mud. Because these are career people who were there before me. These are career people who will be there after me. These are honorable men and women who do their jobs, and they're being attacked because their boss happens to be running for governor.
Well, I want to ask you, we mentioned Harpootlian a moment ago. You're going to be in court with him next month before the justices of the South Carolina Supreme Court to argue the appeal of Alec Murdaugh. This is obviously a case that really puts you on the map. Statewide, international, national exposure. Your team did a phenomenal job on that trial. I mean, I'll be honest, we've been very critical of sort of how things have unfolded in the aftermath of the trial, but that's no knock on your team and your prosecutors. But looking ahead to this Supreme Court hearing in February, what do you think the odds are? You guys have argued that these verdicts should be upheld, that these verdicts are just and true. You have, through delegating prosecutorial authority to another solicitor, determined, in your eyes anyway, that there was not jury tampering, although I think there was an evidentiary hearing where it was pretty clear we heard there was jury tampering. But as you see this hearing coming up, you're obviously going to make you're going to appear before the justices. What are the points that you want to make to them as you try to keep these convictions intact, to uphold these verdicts?
Well, we obviously are going to make our statements to the court and make the points that we want the court to consider in our pleadings as well as in our oral advocacy when we show up in court. I'm not going to make any comments outside of court. This case is under appeal before the state Supreme Court. Our team is currently getting ready for our defense. We stand by our work product. We did a great thing a couple of years ago. Again, this is me praising the men and women in the Attorney General's office. Creighton Waters and his team, I assigned them to this case. I had their back the whole time. I sat there with them. I worked with them in the trenches, and I saw them pour their guts out for this case. I saw the entire office rally around it, everyone. And we're going to stand by our work product all the way to the Supreme Court, and we're going to give it a strong legal defense. And I am optimistic about the outcome.
Yeah. Obviously, the Supreme Court will not be the last word on the case, though. In the event Alec Murdaugh is unsuccessful in pursuing the appeal before the state Supreme Court, he can file a habeas motion at the federal level. And again, I don't want to be doom and gloom for your office, but the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, the standard that they have applied to the alleged jury tampering, vastly different than the one that's former Chief Justice Jean Toll applied in her ruling denying Murdaugh a new trial.
All I'm going to say, Will, because we're under appeal, we stand by our product, and we're going to give it the vigorous defense it deserves. And again, South Carolina got to see the excellence in the members of the Office of the Attorney General over the last couple of years, and you're going to see that same excellence in the appellate process.
Well, let me ask you this, though, because there were some convictions, some pleas adjacent to Murdaugh. In fact, we saw one just this past month with Becky Hill, the disgraced clerk of court from Colleton County. It wasn't a jury tampering conviction, curiously, but there were some adjacent drug-related convictions, and there is still one big drug-related defendant tied to the Murdaugh case that's still hanging out there. When is Curtis Eddie Smith going to be prosecuted, or when are we going to have a plea deal involving the charges against Eddie Smith?
Well, Will, obviously, I can't comment on an ongoing investigation and where it is in that process. I know you want me to. I just can't. What I can tell you is that our team is evaluating every aspect of this case, as well as the dozens and dozens of drug trafficking cases pouring into South Carolina, the human trafficking cases, the corruption cases, the white-collar cases that we have. So they're all being evaluated.
It's been 4 years, though.
Well,
that's a lot of evaluating.
Well, Will, I mean, you got to understand, we have thousands of cases. I'm not gonna comment on something that is still pending, but there are cases out there that go on for years and years and years. As to what the status of that case is, that is something you'll just have to stay tuned for. But again, it's not like we are not doing anything. Just because you don't see something happening doesn't mean that nothing is happening. Like I said, we have thousands of cases thousands office wide within the state grand jury alone. Our cases are very complex. Some of these cases have 60, 70, 80 defendants, hundreds of charges. They're multi-jurisdictional, both federal, there's federal components to them because we work with the feds and local law enforcement. These are very, very complex cases. And so sometimes when you put down a case, you pick up another case, and you have to see that one through. So these things can take.
Do you believe that we got accountability from the Murdaugh murders, crime and corruption saga? Because there was a lot of judicial corruption that people just don't talk about anymore. There's this bigger drug backdrop, money laundering backdrop that doesn't seem like there was a lot of accountability. I mean, obviously there were verdicts on the murders.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly Alec Murdaugh has been held accountable for his financial crimes, pled guilty to those. Your office led that prosecution as well. But the bigger picture, the culture that enabled, accommodated, facilitated Alec Murdaugh, still there.
I can't disagree with you. It's hard to prove a negative. I mean, of course, there's tons of corruption out there. We know what we know, but there's lots that we don't know. What I can tell you, Will, is this is one of the reasons I've been a huge advocate of judicial selection reform, bringing accountability to how judges are elected and how they're held accountable. Is just like prosecutors and defense attorneys are held accountable through our system, but judicial selection reform is a major component of that. I believe that the prosecution of Alec Murdaugh sent a shock ripple through that community. I believe that there are a lot of people who are very nervous today because of that. Are there people who probably got away with a crime? I would have to say yes. I don't know who they are or where they are, but there has been corruption in time memorial. I mean, it's been around. You and I have been talking about this for years. Our goal is to go out there and prosecute all of it that we can find. At the same time, people have to understand that there was a culture that existed down there for decades that people did not talk about, that people were afraid to talk about. And I remember my brother, right after the Murdaugh case concluded, was sitting at a restaurant back to back at a booth with another family. He was with his family. There was a family sitting next to him. And the adults at the table were talking about how their faith in the criminal justice system and in the justice system at large in that area of the state has been renewed because of this trial. My hope is that people will take away from this that we will always be vigilant in seeking out corruption and prosecuting. We'll always be vigilant in holding judges and any elected official accountable when they violate the public trust. That's a position I've taken since the day I've been Attorney General. It's a position I'm going to take until the day I die.
Let me ask you this. If you are presented with clear and compelling evidence of a drug operation involving Alec Murdaugh, adjacent to Alec Murdaugh, that extended beyond him, connected to these matters, will your office pursue that?
Absolutely.
Okay. We may be holding you to that sooner rather than later. I want to ask you, though, we're going to move on. And by the way, really appreciate you being generous with your time and answering these questions.
No.
But I want to move on to a couple cases that you've been taking criticism on, but these are actually cases I'm kind of on your side on these, honestly. But I wanted to ask you, in the case out of Horry County, it's just generating a ton of national attention. It's not Murdaugh level, but it's a lot of the same players involved in attorneys, podcasters, etc. The story of Scott Spivey. This is a wrongful death case. It's tied to a 2023 shooting. Your office reviewed this case. Your office determined that it was a stand your ground shooting, where the two individuals who fired and shot and killed Scott Spivey acted in self-defense. To your credit, you have offered to have another solicitor look at that, Barry Barnett up in Spartanburg.
Yes, sir.
You have empowered him. Once the formal investigation, the criminal investigation of this is done, you've empowered him to look at that decision, even perhaps second guess it if he finds reason to do so. We've been told that there is, and the quote we were given was, incontrovertible evidence that Scott Spivey, if he didn't fire, was pointing and presenting at the moment he was shot by these two individuals, Weldon Boyd and what's the other guy's name? I can't remember the other guy's name, but I want to ask you this, because the political thing for you to do, given the uproar in Horry County, would just be to charge these guys and let, whatever happens, happen. You didn't do that. You've taken a lot of heat for it. Nancy Mace in particular has been really dogging you out on this case. This has also been set for February. There's now going to be a stand your ground on the civil side. Where do you think this case is going? Are you confident still in your office's determination? And when will the public see the evidence in this case?
First, before I say anything, it is not lost on me that a man lost his life, and I don't want to disrespect or dishonor him, and I certainly don't want to say anything that's impolitic or that diminishes his life, because I mean obviously he lost his life. But the right thing for the Attorney General to do, the right thing for any prosecutor to do, is to apply the law not with any passion or prejudice or biases, but to take the facts as they are given to you and apply the law as it has been passed and given to me. And again, I want to give a shout out. This stand your ground component of the case was reviewed by senior prosecutors in my office. In fact, I had one prosecutor with over a quarter century and then two others who had over 40 years of legal experience. One of them was a retired circuit judge who had stand your ground case experience. They reviewed this case. They looked at the facts from the case file. Yes, I know that there's a lot of controversy surrounding the investigation, which is why that was assigned, why that is being investigated. Mm-hmm. But at the end, I made a commitment to myself, especially at the criminal justice system, that I will never allow politics to enter the criminal justice system, that I will always do the right thing, no matter the political cost. In this particular case, I believe that the men and women in the office made the recommendation that the stand your ground law applied. I agreed with them, including that retired circuit judge who now works in our office made that same decision. I have to look at myself in the mirror every single day. Every case has a V in the middle, state versus so-and-so and so-and-so versus the state. And I'm always going to upset half the people in the room. But at the end of the day, I have to look at the man in the mirror and I have to be able to sleep with a clear conscience. The law in this case, we believe, applied, the stand your ground law applied. Now, for me, it's not really about winning. It's about getting to the truth. Okay? We had information that was given to us from the Horry County Police Department investigation. We looked at that evidence. I think you've seen some of it, right? Others have seen it. We made a decision with that evidence. However, there was a lot of concern that the Horry County PD may have done things that needed to be reviewed and investigated. There were lots of things that happened several days later, statements that were made, that things that were caught on camera. So I did not want to be the person, and I didn't want my staff to be the people reviewing the investigative agency whose work product we relied on for the stand your ground decision. So I'm okay with someone coming to a different decision, because for me, at the end of the day, it's about getting to the right decision. So I sent the investigation to Horry County on the Horry County PD to a solicitor on the other side of the state who will never stand for election, is completely, has no political influence over him. I wanted him to make a decision on that. If he finds that there was something bad that occurred, he should act appropriately. If he finds evidence that our office didn't have access to, or if there is new evidence that he finds through that review, I have told him, if you want to reevaluate the stand your ground component, I did not send that to him, but I said, you are free to reevaluate, because I don't want to tie his hands. If we miss something because there's evidence we didn't get.
You told him he could bring charges if he wanted to.
I told him, I said, yes, if you want to take the stand your ground and you want to reverse our decision because we missed something, we had a blind spot, feel free to do so. Because at the end of the day, Will, it's about doing the right thing. Look, I did not know Mr. Spivey. I do not know anyone in his family. I do not know Mr. Boyd or the other gentleman in the car. I don't know any of the players in this. I have no friends to reward. I have no enemies to punish. I don't stand to lose money or get money if this case goes one way or the other. There's also a civil standard. There's also a civil case. Mm-hmm. The stand your ground, there's going to be a stand your ground hearing here in a few weeks. That civil case may go a different way. The solicitor may go a different way. But at the end of the day, we want people to know is we try to make decisions based on the law and the facts. And I'm not going to litigate it here today, but a lot of the facts that people are talking about on social media or on crime podcast or, in news articles, it's not the actual act. It's not the evidence. I mean, it's people, it's kind of like that game of telephone where someone tells something and it goes all the way around the table and it's completely different. It's a shadow of the evidence, not even the actual evidence.
There's been a lot of misinformation in this case. That's accurate.
Yes, you and I agree. There's tons of misinformation on this case. But at the end of the day, the political thing for me to do would be to reverse course, or just to force the prosecutors to ignore their conscience, to ignore the law, and to ignore the facts, and do the politically expedient thing.
There's a lot of Republican votes in Overy County.
There are a lot of Republican votes, but I'll tell you right now, I don't want to
win them back.
Frankly, but here's the thing, Will. I think there's a lot of people that appreciate what I did. The people who like what I did, they're not out there on their keyboards blowing me up on social media. They're raising their kids. They're driving to work. They're going to the soccer game. They're taking their kids to school. They're not out there talking. I've talked to people all the time who says we think it was the right call. But at the end of the day, Will, this is going to be controversial. You probably like it. I want to be the next governor. I want to win. I want people's vote. I want them to trust me. The only way for me to earn their trust is for me be willing to make a very difficult decision. I have made a decision that has upset people. I have ratified the decision made by my team. If for me to get their vote requires me to violate my oath or to be an unethical prosecutor, then I don't want their vote. Okay? And if I have to lose their vote or lose the race because I did the honorable right thing, regardless of what the bloggers and the podcasters are saying, then so be it. That's not what I want. And I believe that this is a blip. I believe that this is a minority of people who believe this. It's a very loud minority. But I believe that every person I talk to, that I talked to a woman today who says, explain the Spivey case to me. I spent 5 minutes talking to her and she said, that makes complete sense. So doing the right thing, you have to have the courage to do the right thing, Will. And sometimes political courage costs people, but I believe I will be rewarded. This is the rule I've lived by for 15 years, right? Remember, I'm the one that launched the investigation on the former Speaker of the House that led to the probe gate, right? Everyone thought, no one thought I had the guts to do it, but I did it because it was the right thing to do. The evidence was there and we pursued it, right? I'm the one that launched investigations against sheriffs and elected officials who had endorsed me and who were my friends, who I'm no longer friends with. People I like, but they made bad decisions, and my office had to move forward on it. So, as Attorney General, I've been willing to make tough decisions that maybe weren't politically expedient in certain areas of the state, but I made the decision. And you need people who are willing to stand up and make tough decisions. And I don't know that other people would have made the same decision because they would have blown in whichever way the political winds were blowing.
I want to ask you another issue where you've been criticized, where FITSNEWS has, I think, had your back and defended you. The issue of the plutonium settlement. Yeah. This is one that every time it comes up, I hear it from your opponents. I predict you're going to see it on television screens at some point. As the Republican primary heats up, one of your rivals is going to run a television advertisement on this. But the political hit is that you basically gave tens of millions of dollars to your former law firm of taxpayer money from a settlement.
Really. I gave it to him. I just gave him a big old bag of cash. That's
bag of cash. Yeah. But when this first happened back in, I think it was 2000, we first started writing about it. It was the Department of Energy reaching a settlement with the state of South Carolina over the plutonium that was stored here. You kind of walked me through this very early in the process.
And by the way, you listened to me and you were fair.
Yeah.
I thank you for that.
But walk us through this, because this is going to come up. It's already come up in this race. Tell us how this went down.
So first, understand South Carolina has what's called a contingency fee contract. There are certain cases that sometimes you pay a law firm by the hour. And you could pay millions of dollars in hourly attorney fees over 4, 5, 6 years and get zero in return for it. There's also what we have, contingency fee contracts, which means, hey, law firm, a law firm agrees to take a case on behalf of the state. They may invest hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, depending. I think it was hundreds of thousands in this particular case. And if they get $0, they're out the money. It costs taxpayers nothing. If they get a return, they get a judgment, then it's kind of like an income tax bracket. The first $umpteen million is like 23%. And then the next several $1 million, it drops down to 19. And each time you go up on the bracket of recovery, all the way up to $200 million, it's capped at 2% at $200 million. It's like an income tax.
And who sets these caps, by the way? It's not you.
So we took the contracts used by former Attorney General Henry McMaster and basically it was a contract he designed. It's probably based on what other states are doing.
And your former law partners, they didn't pitch you, did they? They pitched my ex-girlfriend, didn't they? Dylan's laughing over
So
there. I finally said something stupid.
Over
they pitched Nikki Haley on this.
They brought the case to the state to me.
Okay.
We obviously kept Governor Haley because it involved the state of South Carolina. We want to keep the governor involved. But in this particular case, so now that you understand how it works, law firms assume full responsibility. They upfront all the cost. If they get $0, they make no money. In fact, they lose money. If they make a settlement, then they get a percentage of that judgment based on a fee schedule, like an income tax bracket.
So it's an all or nothing proposition.
Yes, absolutely. Now remember,
and it doesn't cost the state anything for them to pursue it.
It costs the state absolutely nothing. Now, people say I gave to my former law firm. Here's the thing, Will. When a law firm brings me a case and it's meritorious, and they're the ones that do all the work, our general policy is to say, you did all the work, you found the case, we will engage you. I have engaged law firms where I knew of the people but had no relationship with them. I've engaged law firms where people from different political parties. I've engaged law firms where I actually knew the people. In this case, I knew them, but they brought us the case. They said, this is what we believe. I ran this past the federal delegation. I ran this past the governor's office at the time.
You got sued on this too, and you recently won a lawsuit on this?
I'm going to come back to that.
Okay.
So they bring us, and here's the reason we give the law firm that brings us the case, the reason we usually assign them is because if I get the reputation of, hey, if you take Alan Wilson a case for the state and he doesn't like you or he has a preferred law firm, then he's just going to give it to them. So no one will ever bring us cases. Mm-hmm. And the goal is for people out there, if you have a really legitimate case that will benefit the state, we want you to bring it to us. We don't want to disincentivize that. So I did not give my former law firm anything. People at that law firm developed a legal theory. They drafted a complaint, which they litigated in the Court of Federal Claims here in South Carolina, the Federal District Court, the Fourth Circuit Court, in the District Court in the Ninth Circuit, as well as the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, including, I believe, a pleading to the Supreme Court. It lasted 4 years. The case started off as a $100 million case. Okay. We thought we were going to get $100 million. Because the case went on so long, Will, that number grew all the way to $500 million at the negotiation. So we sat down to the very last 6 months of the first Trump administration. I went and met with the U.S. Attorney General at the time, Bill Barr, met with Dan Brouillette, the Secretary of Energy. The law firm that we had engaged helped get us to the 2-yard line. I went up there and I negotiated an additional $100 million for them to settle. We brought in $600 million to the state of South Carolina. The federal government dropped their opposition. They paid out of the federal judgment fund. When you take $600 million and you plug it into that fee schedule, it's like an income tax bracket. You don't know what your income taxes are going to be until you know what your income is, right? We don't know what the attorney fee is going to be until we get a recovery. We got $600 million. Just to give you a point, some perspective to people out there. The largest settlement, I think, in history during the McMaster term as AG was $44 million against Eli Lilly. He started a case against on the Risperdal case at the end, but I inherited it. That case was $120 million. So those were the only two cases of note in the history of the state. This case was a $600 million case. The attorney fees, when you plug in $600 million, we had to pay 23% on the first however many million, and then it dropped, and then the percentages drop as you go up. That number came out to $75 million, which is about 12.5% of $600 million. The people who were suing me on this are people who would not accept less than 40% in the private sector. It ended up being 12.5%. By the way, this is something people need to know at home. I put an additional negotiation in there that if the federal government doesn't remove the rest of the plutonium by 2035, which is in 9 years, we could get up to an additional $1.5 billion, of which no lawyer will see a single dime. So this could be a $2.1 billion if you have $600 million plus 1.5, which means that $75 million attorney's fees would have been like, what, 3%?
But how do you counter that when they drop his 30-second spot on says Alan Wilson gave his law firm billions of dollars? And I know you see this because you are the front runner in this race. That's why we wanted you on this show first. But that means all the knives are coming for you.
Yeah.
whether it's this, whether it's Spivey, whether it's the tough questions we asked you earlier about the prosecuting child sex offenders. These are going to appear in ads. These ads are going to be brutal.
Yeah.
That doesn't concern you?
Of course it concerns me, Will. Absolutely. When people lie about you, when they run your reputation through the dirt, and here's the thing, they're watching this right now and they're getting their little knives out and they want to be governor and they will do anything. They will lie. They will say anything to be governor. But here's the thing, Will, that's been the case I've been elected statewide 4 different times. I've had people accuse me of everything under the sun. I've been accused of things that people would crawl under rocks. You know, it's all been lies. It's not been true. You have to have the courage to stand up, to take the hit, take the swings and the arrows. You've got to be able to do it. I've done it for 15 years as Attorney General. I'm going to be able to listen. We're going to have a response. I'm not going to project it here. I don't want to televise what our response is. But look, the people out there that will repackage this and lie about it so they can get votes, we have something special for them.
Oh, really?
Okay. At the end of the
Sounds kind of good.
I don't normally attack first. I mean, by attack meaning is if someone comes at me, I will defend myself. But my goal, Will, has always been to tell people about what I want to do. Like, I don't want this. I don't want this interview's been a lot about my record and the things that I've been attacked for. But what I really want to talk about is my plan for eliminating the state income tax, my property tax reform, and my ideas for making education, especially higher education, more accessible for families, expanding our dual enrollment programs, having earlier reading and math comprehension programs for kids as early as 4K that is universal, expanding access to technical colleges, doging South Carolina government. I mean, and we have a plan for creating an expansive, proactive Office of the Inspector General that will go out there and look and root out fraud, waste, and abuse. Infrastructure. There's so many things that we can do for infrastructure that will make our state better, expanding our energy grid, growing our interstate systems. You know, South Carolina is leaving so much money on the table because we're not monetizing all the real estate that we own. All that green grass on the interstates, we need to monetizing that. We need to have public-private partnerships and create toll roads that are expressways. We need to lease. We need to have leases with telecommunications companies and energy companies for the pipelines along state-owned roads and interstates. We need to privatize our rest stops. We need to have mixed-use state office buildings so that we're collecting property taxes, which we're not currently doing. There is so much we can do, but we just got to get outside the box. And you got to have someone who can be an agent of reform, without an agent of chaos. You got to have someone who has the courage to make the tough decisions. I have demonstrated the ability to lead in combat. I have demonstrated the ability to do the right thing, even when doing the wrong thing would be more politically expedient for me. So for people out there who think I'm a nice guy, don't mistake meekness for weakness. Meekness is power under control. And I believe that I have my power under control because you don't want an attorney general who's going to take one of the most powerful offices in all of South Carolina and weaponize it against their enemies. You don't want an attorney general. If you want me to have all this power because you like me, the next person you may not like. And so that is why I have always constrained the power of the AG's office, because I knew that if I expanded it, it would one day be used for evil. And I wanted to keep it confined because I want the office to be answerable to the people.
So basically, anyone taking shots at Alan Wilson better be ready to take some in return.
Look, don't bring a knife to a gunfight.
Well, speaking of, you got any idea who it might be? I mean, I think most folks would argue this race is going to go to a runoff, just based on the levels of support. The undecideds, I think the recent polls, public polls, have undecideds at about 33, 35%.
Somewhere there.
I think they're higher personally. I don't know what your internals are showing, but we're heading toward a head-to-head runoff. And for those of you who don't follow South Carolina elections, how it works, if no candidate in a partisan primary hits 50% plus one, the top two face off in a head-to-head runoff election 2 weeks later. So that was, as you mentioned, would be June 23rd. If you're in that runoff, you want.
Frankly, I feel like I stack up against any of them. I'll let the people decide who my opponent will be, but I plan to be in that runoff, and I plan to win it.
General, I appreciate you taking the time to come in on this inaugural edition of FITSPolitics.
Yeah.
You answered some tough questions. I appreciate you
Well, I do
being
want to
willing to
say,
do it.
you and I, let me say this in closing. You have, you and I have not always agreed, wrote some pretty tough articles, but you've always been fair, and you've always had an open door, and you've always kept your word to me, and you never violated your word when you and I had private conversations, and then we go on camera, and you told me you were going to be tough in this interview. You were tough, but I think your questions were fair. I would like to close my part by looking to the people out there that are watching this. If you're looking for a governor who is perfect, or has never made a mistake, that you're always going to agree with, I'm not your candidate. You need to go somewhere else, because there's no such, that candidate doesn't exist. But if you're looking for a governor who will fight for you, who will always be accessible to you, who will always be accountable to you, who will be willing to make tough decisions that will take South Carolina from good to great, then I would ask for your vote. If you don't vote for me in the June 9th or June 23rd runoff, it can't be because I didn't ask. I'm asking everyone for their vote, and I'm asking you for the opportunity to earn your vote. Will, thank you for giving me this forum.
Absolutely. And folks, FITSPolitics, it is the new feature here on FITSNEWS.com. We've got a ton of great guests lined up. We're hoping to hear from some of your rivals in this race in the not too distant future. But next week, we've got a very special guest. Very excited to bring Wes Donahue on the show, folks. One of the most seasoned political strategists. Alan, you know Wes.
No, Wesley,
You've dealt with him in the past.
Good guy.
He's been one of the masterminds of the Doge SC movement, working with Rom Reddy, pushing some very substantive reforms at the state level here in South Carolina. We're going to bring Wes in to not only talk about Doge SC, but also get his thoughts, frankly, on the general here and the other candidates in the race for governor. A lot of other big guests coming up in the weeks to follow. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this inaugural edition of FITSPolitics. Be on the lookout for future episodes, and we'll be on live with Wes Donahue next week, Wednesday night, 7 p.m., right here on FITSNEWS.com. Thanks for joining us.